I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here I am. My name is Emma Wilson, and this is how my perfect wedding day turned into a nightmare that would change my life forever. You know those moments when everything seems too perfect? When you can't stop smiling because your dreams are finally coming true? That was me, standing in the bridal suite of Lakeview Gardens, overlooking the sparkling waters of Lake Washington. The morning sun was streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow over my custom-made lace wedding dress. My best friend Sophie was adjusting my veil, the Martinez family heirloom that my future mother-in-law Maria had tearfully presented to me last week. Everything was perfect, too perfect. If only I'd known what was about to happen. If only I'd noticed the signs. But I was too caught up in the joy of finally marrying Danny, my dream come true, the man who'd swept me off my feet at that charity event 2 years ago. Looking back now, I realize that sometimes the universe has a twisted way of saving us from ourselves. The morning had started like a fairy tale. I woke up to the sound of gentle rain against the windows of the evergreen suite where my bridal party and I had spent the night. Seattle weather, always keeping us guessing. But by the time Sophie arrived with coffee and pastries from the Daily Grind, the same coffee shop where Danny and I had our first date, the clouds had parted, letting streams of sunlight paint the room in shades of gold and ivory, matching our wedding colors perfectly. "It's a sign," Lauren, my sister and bridesmaid, had said with a grin. "The weather gods approve of this union." If only she knew how wrong she was. The hours flew by in a blur of hairspray, makeup, and champagne. Toasts. My mother, Catherine, kept tearing up every time she looked at me, and even my usually stoic father, Robert, seemed emotional as he paced the suite, checking his watch every few minutes. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 p.m., and everything was running right on schedule. Amanda, our wedding planner, was in her element, coordinating with vendors and directing the setup of the glass-walled ceremony space where 175 of our closest friends and family would witness our vows. I was putting on my grandmother's pearl earrings, my something borrowed, when Sophie's phone buzzed. I watched in the mirror as her expression changed, just for a split second, before she quickly composed herself and slipped the phone into her pocket. Later, I would remember this moment and wish I'd asked her what she'd seen. But I was too preoccupied with my own happiness, with the butterflies in my stomach, with thoughts of Danny waiting at the altar. "Emma," Sophie said, her voice careful, measured. "Are you sure about this? About Danny?" I laughed, adjusting my veil for the 100th time. "Of course I'm sure. Why would you ask that now?" She hesitated, playing with the sage green sash of her bridesmaid dress. "It's just, there are some things, rumors." But before she could finish, my mother burst in with the photographer, and the moment was lost in a flurry of pre-ceremony photos. Sophie's question faded to the back of my mind, dismissed as simple wedding day jitters. I wish I'd listened. I wish I'd pressed her for more information. But isn't that always the way? We see what we want to see, hear what we want to hear. At 3:45 p.m., I was standing in the bridal waiting area, my father beside me, when I heard the first whispers. The guests were seated. The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's Canon, and everything was ready. But there was a commotion at the back of the ceremony space. I could hear raised voices, gasps, and then what sounded like Amanda, our wedding planner, trying to keep her voice down while clearly arguing with someone. "This isn't happening," I heard Sophie mutter under her breath. She exchanged a look with Lauren that I couldn't quite interpret. "What's going on?" I asked, but before anyone could answer, the double doors to the ceremony space flew open. And there she stood, Olivia Parker, Danny's ex-girlfriend, wearing a wedding dress that could have been pulled from the pages of a bridal magazine. Her dark hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and in her hands, she held what looked like a manila envelope. The string quartet stopped playing. The entire room fell silent. And then Olivia's voice, clear and confident, rang out through the space. I object to this wedding. And once you all hear what I have to say, you'll understand why Danny Martinez can't marry Emma Wilson today, because he's still legally married to me. The envelope in her hands suddenly felt like a bomb about to go off. My father's grip on my arm tightened. I heard my mother gasp, and somewhere in the front of the room, I heard Danny's voice. Olivia, don't. But she was already walking down the aisle, my aisle, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor, her expression a mix of triumph and what looked almost like pity as she looked at me. The manila envelope was open now, and she was pulling out papers, holding them up for everyone to see. Marriage certificate, she announced, her voice carrying through the stunned silence. Dated 3 months ago, signed in Vegas after that marketing conference. Danny might have told you it was just a business trip, Emma, but we both know Vegas is for lovers, don't we, Danny? I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. I looked toward the altar, seeking Danny's eyes, praying this was some horrible mistake. But the look on his face, guilt, shame, fear, told me everything I needed to know. The perfect day, the perfect man, the perfect life I'd planned. It was all a lie. And that was just the beginning of what would become the most transformative day of my life. A day that would strip away everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and most importantly, myself. But looking back now, I realize that sometimes the worst moments in our lives are actually doorways to something better. We just can't see it through our tears at the time. If you've ever had your world shattered in front of everyone you love, if you've ever had to find strength when you felt weakest, if you've ever had to rebuild your life from the ground up, then this story is for you. Because what happened next would teach me lessons about resilience, self-worth, and true love that I never could have learned any other way. Before I continue with the rest of this unbelievable story, take a moment to subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell. Because just like my wedding day, things are about to take some unexpected turns that you won't want to miss. Trust me, the revelation of Danny's secret marriage? That was just the tip of the iceberg. And here's a question for you. Have you ever had a moment when your perfect plans fell apart, only to realize later it was the best thing that could have happened to you? Share your story in the comments below. Now, let me tell you what happened next, because standing there in my wedding dress, staring at my fiancé's secret wife, I had no idea that this was actually the beginning of the most important chapter of my life. Time seemed to slow down as the marriage certificate trembled in Olivia's perfectly manicured hands. The gentle rustle of paper somehow echoed through the silent ceremony space, competing only with the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. I felt my father's grip tighten on my arm, probably the only thing keeping me upright at that moment. The sunlight streaming through the glass walls of Lakeview Gardens suddenly felt too bright, too harsh, illuminating every shocked face in the side crowd. Danny took a step forward, his movements jerky, unnatural, like a puppet with tangled strings. "I can explain," he said, his voice cracking. But Olivia wasn't finished. She turned to face our guests, her wedding dress catching the light, creating an almost angelic effect that felt like a cruel joke. "There's more," she announced, pulling more documents from her envelope. Bank statements, hotel receipts, text, messages. While Danny was planning this wedding with Emma, he was living a double life with me. Las Vegas wasn't our only stop. There was Chicago, Miami, that romantic weekend in Vancouver. She paused, her eyes finding mine. "I believe that was the weekend you thought he was at a marketing conference, right, Emma?" The room erupted in murmurs. I saw phones being pulled out, photos being taken. My perfect wedding was turning into a social media circus. Through the chaos, I caught glimpses of familiar faces. My third-grade students' parents in the back row, their mouths hanging open. My principal, Mr. Stevens, looking anywhere but at me. Danny's mother, Maria, clutching her rosary, tears streaming down her face. Sophie stepped forward, positioning herself between me and Olivia like a shield. "That's enough," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Security!" But Olivia just laughed, the sound light and musical, making it somehow worse. "Security? I have every right to be here. In fact, I'm the only bride who should be here. Would you like to see the prenup too? It's quite generous." That's when Danny finally found his voice. He rushed down the aisle, reaching for the documents in Olivia's hands. "Stop this! You're ruining everything!" His words hit me like a physical blow. Not, "It's not true," or "This is a mistake." No, he was worried about things being ruined. The perfect facade he'd carefully constructed was crumbling, and that was his concern. "I'm ruining everything?" Olivia's voice rose. "You're the one who came to me that night in Vegas. You're the one who said you'd never stopped loving me."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"You're the one who proposed after 3 bottles of champagne and insisted we get married right away. And now you're standing here, about to commit bigamy?" The word bigamy seemed to echo off the glass walls. Someone in the back of the room whispered, "Isn't that illegal?" Another voice answered, "Very." I looked at Ryan, Danny's best man, his face a mask of guilt. He knew. Of course he knew. The bachelor party in Vegas. He'd been there. All those whispered conversations I'd noticed between him and Danny, the way he could barely meet my eyes during the rehearsal dinner. The signs had been there all along. My mother appeared at my side, her hand cool against my flushed cheek. "Emma, sweetheart, let's get you out of here." But I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the spot as I watched the scene unfold before me. Danny and Olivia were arguing now, their voices rising, airing their dirty laundry in front of everyone I knew. The perfect, charming Danny I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a desperate man I didn't recognize. "You weren't supposed to be here," he shouted at Olivia. "We had an agreement." "Oh?" Olivia's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. "You mean the agreement where you promised to divorce Emma right after the wedding? Where you said once you had access to her trust fund, we'd run away together? That agreement?" Trust fund. The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. The trust fund my grandparents had set up, the one I'd get access to only after marriage, the one Danny had been so interested in when we first got engaged. Lauren gasped beside me. "Emma, your trust fund. That's why he..." Finally, my body unfroze. The numbness that had paralyzed me gave way to something else. Rage. Pure, white-hot rage that burned away the shock and confusion. Without thinking, I stepped forward, shrugging off my father's grip, pushing past Sophie's protective stance. My voice, when it came, was steady, surprising even me. "How long?" Danny turned to me, his face pale. "Emma, baby, please." "How?" "Long?" "The whole time," Olivia answered when Danny remained silent. "From the very beginning. We never really broke up. The whole thing was a plan. He needed someone with the right background, the right connections, the right financial situation. She at least had the decency to look somewhat ashamed. It wasn't supposed to go this far. You weren't supposed to fall in love with him." The room spun around me. 2 years. 2 years of my life. All a lie. Every kiss, every promise, every dream we'd shared. All carefully orchestrated steps in an elaborate con. The romantic proposal at Pike Place Market, the tears in his eyes when I'd said yes, the late-night conversations planning our future, it was all fake. I looked down at my engagement ring, the diamond catching the light. Even this was probably a lie. I pulled it off my finger, surprised by how easily it slipped off, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Without a word, I threw it at Danny. It hit his chest and fell to the floor with a soft ping that somehow cut through all the chaos. The sound seemed to break something in Danny. He lunged forward, grabbing my arms. "Emma, please, I can explain. Everything. Yes, it started as a plan, but things changed. My feelings changed. I love you." "Don't touch her." The voice was George Martinez, Danny's father, the retired police officer. He moved with surprising speed for his age, pulling his son away from me. "Daniel Martinez, you're done. Security? Get him out of here before I forget I'm retired." But it was Amanda, our wedding planner, who took control of the situation. She appeared as if by magic, her headset still perfectly in place despite the chaos. "Ladies and gentlemen, I regret to inform you that today's ceremony has been canceled. Please make your way to the exits in an orderly fashion. The valet team is ready to bring your vehicles around." As the guests began to file out, many lingering to gawk or take final photos, I heard snippets of conversations. "Always thought he was too good to be true. Poor Emma, she's such a sweet teacher. Wonder if we can get our gift back. Wait till this hits social media." The last one snapped me back to reality. My private humiliation was about to become very public. I could already imagine the headlines: "Teacher left at altar by bigamist fiancé." My students would see it, their parents would see it, everyone would see it. That's when Sophie took charge. She grabbed my hand and started pulling me toward the bridal suite. "Lauren, get her things. Mrs. Wilson, call the car around. Mr. Wilson, handle the vendors. Now." As my sister and mother rushed to comply, Sophie led me through the back corridors of Lakeview Gardens, away from the prying eyes and whispering voices. Behind us, I could still hear raised voices. Danny arguing with his parents, Olivia talking to someone on the phone, Amanda trying to coordinate the chaos. We burst into the bridal suite, the room where just hours ago I'd been full of joy and anticipation. My wedding dress caught on a chair, the delicate lace ripping with a sound that felt like it came from my own heart. Sophie immediately started gathering my things, shoving them into bags. "We need to get you out of here before the media shows. Up," she said, her nurse's training evident in her efficient movements. "Your place isn't safe. He has keys. You'll stay with me tonight." But I barely heard her. I was staring at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The dress I'd spent months picking out now felt like a costume. The carefully styled hair, the perfect makeup, the Martinez family veil. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone who still believed in fairy tales and happy endings. A knock at the door made us both jump. "Emma?" It was Isabella. Wong, one of our mutual friends. The one who had introduced us at that charity event 2 years ago. "Emma, I need to tell you something. About Danny and Olivia. I knew. I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner." Sophie yanked open the door, her face thunderous. "You knew? You knew and you let this happen?" Isabella stepped back, her hands raised defensively. "It wasn't my place to—" "Not your place." Sophie's voice rose. "She's your friend. You watched her plan this wedding, spend her savings, fall in love with a man you knew was lying to her." "Sophie," I said quietly, surprised by how calm I felt. "Let her speak." Isabella entered the room, wringing her hands. "It started before he met you. Danny and Olivia had money problems, bad investments, gambling debts. They needed a way out. When they heard about your trust fund—" She trailed off, unable to meet my eyes. "So they planned it all," I finished for her. The perfect meet cute at the charity event, the whirlwind romance, the proposal. Isabella nodded miserably. Olivia was supposed to stay quiet until after the wedding, after Danny had access to your trust fund. I don't know why she changed the plan. A bitter laugh escaped me. Because she realized he was going to double-cross her, too. "Didn't you hear him? You weren't supposed to be here. We had an agreement." He was probably planning to take the money and run, leaving both of us behind. The truth of my words hit me as I spoke them. The man I'd loved, the man I'd trusted, with my heart, my future, my everything, he'd never existed. He was a character, carefully crafted to appeal to me, to win my trust, to make me fall in love. My legs gave out and I sank onto the plush ottoman, the layers of my wedding dress poofing around me. Sophie immediately knelt beside me, her arms wrapping around my shoulders. "Let it out, Em. It's okay to cry." But I couldn't cry. Not yet. The shock was still too fresh, the betrayal too huge to process. Instead, I found myself thinking about my students, about the lessons I taught them about trust and honesty, about the quotes I had hanging in my classroom. Character is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. What a joke. Lauren burst into the room, her arms full of my belongings. "Car's ready, back entrance. Mom and Dad are handling the vendors and guests." She paused, looking at Isabella. "What's she doing here?" "Leaving," Sophie said firmly, shooting Isabella a look. "That could freeze hell. And if you have any decency left, you'll keep your mouth shut about where Emma's going." As Isabella slipped out, I finally found the strength to stand. "Help me out of this dress," I said, reaching for the buttons. "I never want to see it again." My sister and best friend worked in silence, undoing the countless buttons and hooks that held the dress together. As it fell away, I felt like I was shedding more than just fabric. I was shedding the naive woman who had believed in perfect love, stories. The woman who had trusted too easily, loved too blindly. Lauren handed me the clothes she'd grabbed from my overnight bag. Jeans, a sweater, sneakers. Normal clothes. Real clothes. As I changed, I could hear my phone buzzing continuously. In my purse. Messages, calls, social media notifications. The story was already spreading. "Ready?" Sophie asked, holding my coat. I took one last look in the mirror. The carefully applied makeup was smudged now, the perfect hairstyle falling apart. But beneath the mess, I saw something in my eyes I hadn't noticed before. Steel, strength, the beginning of anger. "Ready," I said, turning away from my reflection. "Let's go." As we snuck out through the back entrance of Lakeview Gardens, I heard more commotion from the main hall. Someone was yelling. It sounded like Danny and his father. The words police and fraud drifted through the air. Good, I thought with a savageness that surprised me. Let him face the consequences. Let him lose everything, just like he'd tried to take everything from me. Sophie's car was waiting, engine running. As Lauren helped me into the back seat, I caught a glimpse of the lake through the trees. The sun was setting now, painting the water in shades of pink and gold. It should have been the perfect backdrop for wedding photos. Instead, it was the backdrop for my escape. "Where to?" Sophie asked as she pulled away from the venue. "Your place," I said, watching Lakeview Gardens disappear in the side mirror. And then, I don't know. For the first time in 2 years, my future was completely unscripted. No carefully planned con, no manipulated romance, no orchestrated happy ending. Just me, facing whatever came next. And somehow, that felt more real than anything that had happened in the past 2 years. Sophie's apartment felt like a different world compared to the chaos we'd left behind at Lakeview Gardens. The familiar scent of vanilla candles and brewing coffee wrapped around me like a protective blanket as we stepped through the door. The space was exactly as I remembered it from when I'd lived here before moving in with Danny. Cozy, cluttered, with medical textbooks, and absolutely perfect in its normalcy. "I ordered Chinese," Lauren announced already on her phone. "From Golden Dragon. All your favorites, Em." She paused, looking up from the screen. "And I texted Mom and Dad. They're handling everything at the venue. Dad's talking to the police about pressing charges for fraud." I sank onto Sophie's overstuffed couch, my body suddenly feeling every ounce of exhaustion from the day. The events at the wedding venue felt simultaneously like they'd happened years ago and mere seconds ago. My phone had been buzzing nonstop in my purse, but I couldn't bring myself to look at it yet. Sophie disappeared into her bedroom and returned, with a pair of sweatpants and an oversized University of Washington hoodie. "Here," she said, holding them out. "Let's get you changed into something comfortable. Your hair's probably giving you a headache with all those pins." She was right. The elaborate updo that had taken the stylist 2 hours to create was now a prison of bobby pins and hairspray. As Sophie and Lauren worked to dismantle it, piece by piece, I stared at my reflection in Sophie's living room window. The Seattle skyline twinkled beyond my reflection, the Space Needle illuminated against the darkening sky. How many times had Danny and I stood at this very window, planning our future together? All lies. "I should have seen it coming," I said, wincing as Sophie worked out a particularly stubborn pin. "There were so many signs." Lauren paused in her pin extraction. "What do you mean?" "The way he always changed the subject when I brought up joining our bank accounts after the wedding. How he'd get mysterious work calls late at night. The fact that he never wanted me to post certain photos of us on social media. The realizations were flooding in now, dots connecting to form a picture I'd been too blind to see. He was living a double life the whole time." "Speaking of social media," Sophie said, pulling out the last pin and letting my hair tumble down. "We should probably check the damage." With trembling fingers, I finally pulled out my phone. The screen was flooded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, social media alerts. A photo from the wedding disaster had already gone viral in our local Seattle networks. Someone had captured the exact moment Olivia had revealed the marriage certificate, with me in the background, my face a mask of shock and horror. "Oh God," I groaned, reading the comments. "Wedding gone wrong" was trending locally. "Give me that," Sophie said, snatching the phone. She quickly navigated through my accounts, changing privacy settings and logging me out of everything. "You don't need to see any of this right now." A knock at the door made us all jump. Lauren peered through the peephole, then relaxed. "It's just the food." As we spread the Chinese takeout containers across Sophie's coffee table, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd eaten. The morning's breakfast of champagne and pastries felt like it had happened in another lifetime. But as I picked up my chopsticks, another knock echoed through the apartment, harder, more insistent. "Emma!" Danny's voice carried through the door. "Emma, I know you're in there. Please, just let me explain." Sophie was on her feet in an instant, moving toward the door with purpose. But Lauren grabbed her arm. "Wait," she whispered. "What if he makes a scene? The neighbors." She had a point. The last thing I needed was more public drama. Danny's voice came again, closer to the door now. "Baby, please, it's not what you think. Olivia's lying about everything. I love you." Something inside me snapped. I stood up, my hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Move," I told Sophie and Lauren. They exchanged glances but stepped aside. I opened the door just enough to see Danny standing there, his tuxedo disheveled, his boutonniere hanging limply from his lapel. He looked terrible, and for the first time, I felt absolutely nothing for him. "You have exactly 30 seconds before I call the police," I said, my voice cold enough to surprise even myself. "Emma, thank God." He tried to push the door wider, but I held firm. "Baby, you have to believe me. Olivia's making everything up. Those documents are fake. She's just jealous of what we have." "Had," I corrected. "What we had, which was nothing. But a lie." "No." His voice rose with desperation. "Everything I feel for you is real. Yes, okay. Olivia and I had a thing in Vegas, but it didn't mean anything. I was drunk. It was a mistake. The marriage isn't even legal. We were too intoxicated for it to count. I almost laughed at the absurdity of his defense. So your explanation is that you're not a calculating con man, just a cheating drunk, who accidentally committed bigamy. That's not. I mean, he ran his hands through his hair in frustration. Look, just let me in. We can talk about this properly. I'll explain everything. Your 30 seconds are up, I said, starting to close the door. He slammed his hand against it, preventing me from shutting it completely. The trust fund, he blurted out. That's what this is really about, isn't it? Olivia told you about that. But baby, I don't care about the money. Keep it all. I just want you. For a moment, I stood there processing his words. Even now, even after being caught, he was still trying to manipulate me. Still trying to find the right words to maintain control of the situation. Of me. You know what the funny thing is? I said, meeting his eyes. If you'd actually loved me, if any of this had been real, I would have shared everything with you. The trust fund, my savings, all of it, because that's what people do when they love each other. They share their lives without schemes or conditions. His face changed then, the desperate plea giving way to something darker. You stupid, naive little teacher, he spat. You really think love is all that matters in this world? Wake up, Emma. Everything is about money. Everything. No. Sophie's voice came from behind me as she yanked the door open fully. Everything is about choices, and you made all the wrong ones. She held up her phone, showing that she'd been recording the entire conversation. Now get out before I send this to the police. I'm sure they'd love to add witness intimidation to the fraud charges. Danny's face went pale. Without another word, he turned and stalked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. As soon as he was gone, my legs gave out. Sophie and Lauren caught me before I hit the floor, guiding me back to the couch. I've got you, Sophie murmured, wrapping her arms around me. Let it out, Em. You're safe now. And finally, after hours of shock and numbness, the tears came. I cried for the love I thought I had, for the future I'd planned, for the trust I'd given so freely. Lauren held my hand while Sophie stroked my hair, neither of them trying to offer empty platitudes or false comfort. They just let me cry. When the tears finally subsided, I felt empty, but somehow lighter. The Chinese food had gone cold, but Lauren reheated it in the microwave, and we ate in silence, the city lights twinkling beyond the window like distant stars. What happens now? Lauren asked eventually, setting down her container of lo mein. I took a deep breath, considering the question. My entire life had been derailed. No home to return to, no wedding gifts to unwrap, no honeymoon to pack for. Even my job would be complicated now, with all the publicity surrounding the failed wedding. First, I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. I need to get my things from the apartment. Everything I own is there. Sophie nodded. We'll go tomorrow early. I'll call Amanda. She mentioned something about hiring security for you. We'll get some of the groomsmen to help too, the ones who didn't know about Danny's scheme. Then I need to talk to the police, I continued. Dad mentioned fraud charges. They'll need my statement. Already scheduled for Monday morning. Lauren said, Dad's friend from law school is handling it. He specializes in financial fraud cases. I picked up my chopsticks again, pushing around a piece of broccoli. And then, I don't know, everything I planned, everything I thought. My life would be, it's all gone. No, Sophie said firmly. Your plans with Danny are gone, but you're still here. You're still the amazing teacher who makes a difference in her students' lives. You're still the friend who drops everything to help someone in need. You're still the woman who can quote every line from Pride and Prejudice and makes the best chocolate chip cookies in Seattle. Lauren chimed in. And you're still my big sister who taught me how to stand up for myself, who showed me what strength looks like. She squeezed my hand. Danny didn't give you any of those things. They're all you. Their words washed over me like a healing balm. They were right. Danny might have taken my trust, my savings, and my immediate plans, but he hadn't taken me. I was still here, still whole, still capable of building a new future. My phone buzzed again from where Sophie had placed it on the kitchen counter. We all turned to look at it, but none of us moved to check it. You know, I said slowly, I think I need a social media break, maybe a long one. Sophie nodded approvingly. Good idea. Focus on healing first. The internet will still be there when you're ready. And in the meantime, Lauren added, you can stay here with Sophie, or with Mom and Dad, or bounce between places until you figure out what you want. What did I want? For the past 2 years, everything I'd wanted had been tied to Danny, to our life together. Now I had to figure out who I was without him, what I wanted for myself alone. The thought was terrifying, and somehow strangely exciting. A siren wailed somewhere in the distance, its sound muffled by the apartment's windows. In my mind, I could still see Olivia standing in that wedding dress, holding up the evidence of Danny's betrayal. But the image didn't hurt as much as it had hours ago. Instead, it felt like a wake-up call, a harsh but necessary revelation that had saved me from a much worse fate. You know what I want right now? I said, reaching for the fortune cookie that came with our dinner. I want to order more food, watch terrible reality TV, and pretend just for tonight that this is just another girls' night. Sophie and Lauren exchanged relieved smiles. That, Sophie said, grabbing the takeout menu, we can definitely do. As Lauren scrolled through Netflix and Sophie called in another order, I cracked open my fortune cookie. The small paper inside read, "Every ending is just a new beginning in disguise." I stared at those words for a long moment, then carefully folded the paper and tucked it into my purse. Maybe it was silly to find meaning in a mass-produced fortune cookie message, but right then I needed to believe it was true. I needed to believe that somewhere beyond this pain and betrayal, a new beginning was waiting for me. And for the first time since Olivia had burst into my wedding, I felt something that wasn't anger or pain or shock. It was hope. Small and fragile, but undeniably there. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this ending would lead me somewhere better than I could have imagined. Morning came too quickly, seeping through Sophie's living room curtains in pale streaks of dawn light. I hadn't really slept, just dozed fitfully on the couch, my mind replaying yesterday's events in an endless loop. The early morning silence was broken only by the soft whir of Sophie's coffee maker, programmed to start brewing at 6 a.m. sharp. The aroma of fresh coffee drew me from my makeshift bed. My body ached from the awkward sleeping position, and my head throbbed from a combination of crying and dehydration. As I padded into Sophie's kitchen, I caught my reflection in the microwave door. Mascara smudged under my eyes, hair a tangled mess, still wearing her borrowed sweatpants and hoodie. A far cry from the bride I was supposed to be on my first morning as a married woman. "You're up early," Sophie said, emerging from her bedroom in scrubs. She had an early shift at the hospital, but I knew she'd stayed up late watching over me. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I admitted, accepting the mug of coffee she handed me. A truck full of humiliation and betrayal. Sophie's response was cut off by a knock at the door. We both tensed, remembering Danny's appearance last night. But when Sophie checked the peephole, she relaxed. "It's your dad." My father stood in the hallway, looking like he hadn't slept either. His usually immaculate principal's appearance was rumpled, his tie slightly askew. In his hands, he held several newspapers. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, his voice gentle. "I thought you should see these before heading out today." He laid the newspapers on Sophie's kitchen counter. My story had made the local news. Teachers, dream wedding turns nightmare. Groom's secret marriage exposed, screamed one headline. Another read, double life, marketing executive's wedding scheme unveiled. Great, I muttered, pushing the papers away. Just what I needed. There's more, my father said, pulling out his phone. The police want to talk to you today, not Monday. They've been investigating Danny and Olivia since before yesterday. Apparently this isn't their first scam. The coffee in my stomach turned sour. What do you mean? They've done this before, he explained, his face grim. Different cities, different victims. Danny and Olivia work as a team. He romances wealthy women while she plays the role of the jealous ex. Usually they wait until after the wedding to reveal the truth, after they've gained access to the victim's assets. So I'm just their latest mark? The words tasted bitter in my mouth. Another rich girl they tried to con? You're the one who got away, Sophie corrected, squeezing my shoulder. The one who exposed them before they could complete their scheme. My father nodded. The detective I spoke to said several other women have come forward since yesterday. Your story going viral actually helped. It gave their other victims the courage to speak up. I thought about those other women, each of them probably believing as I had that they'd found true love, only to discover it was all an elaborate con. Had Danny used the same lines on them? The same charming smile? The same practiced gestures of affection? When do they need my statement? I asked, straightening my spine. If my public humiliation could help bring Danny and Olivia to justice, maybe some good could come from this mess. Detective Clark can meet you at 9, my father replied. Lauren's coming by to go with you, and Emma. He hesitated. There's something else you need to know about your apartment. My heart sank. What about it? Danny's been there. Last night after he left here, the neighbors called the police when they heard noise. He was destroying things. Your things, specifically. The mug trembled in my hands, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. How bad? Bad enough, Sophie said, taking the mug before I could drop it. But don't worry, Mom and I already called a moving company. They're meeting us there at 11 with boxes and packing supplies. Whatever he didn't destroy will get out today. I closed my eyes, trying to imagine what I'd find at the apartment. All my books, my teaching materials, my clothes, my memories. What had survived Danny's rage? The thought of him destroying my possessions made me feel violated all over again, as if he was determined to take everything from me, piece by piece. The police have him in custody now, my father added quickly. Him and Olivia both. They won't be able to hurt you anymore. A bitter laugh escaped me. Too late for that. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Lauren arrived with fresh clothes and makeup, helping me make myself look somewhat presentable for the police statement. The detective turned out to be a compassionate woman who listened carefully as I recounted everything. How I'd met Danny, our whirlwind romance, the careful way he'd worked to gain my trust and access to information about my finances. You're not alone, Detective Clark assured me, showing me photos of other women. These are just the victims we know about. Danny Martinez and Olivia Parker have been running variations of this scheme for at least 5 years. Looking at the photos felt like looking into a mirror. All of us similar types, successful professional women with access to family money or trust funds. All of us chosen carefully, groomed to fall for Danny's particular brand of charm. Will they go to prison? I asked, studying the faces of my fellow victims. With the evidence we have now? Absolutely. Financial fraud, conspiracy, multiple counts of bigamy. They're looking at serious time. She paused, her expression softening. But the legal process can be long. Are you ready for that? For the publicity, the court appearances, having to tell your story over and over? Was I ready? Just yesterday, I'd been ready to walk down the aisle, to pledge my life to a man I thought I knew. Now I was being asked if I was ready to help send him to prison. Yes, I said firmly. I'm ready. These people need to be stopped. After giving my statement, Lauren drove us to what had been my home with Danny. The moving truck was already there, along with my mother and several friends from work. The sight of the apartment building made my stomach clench, but I forced myself to walk through those familiar doors one last time. Nothing could have prepared me for what we found inside. Danny's rage had been thorough and targeted. My books lay scattered and torn, pages ripped out and strewn across the floor. My carefully organized teaching materials were shredded. Lesson. Plans and student artwork destroyed. My clothes had been pulled from closets and drawers, many of them cut to pieces. "Oh, Emma," my mother breathed, taking in the destruction. But it was the personal items that hurt the most to see destroyed. The photo albums from my childhood, the handmade cards from my students, the little mementos I'd collected over the years. Danny had known exactly what would hurt me most to lose. Surprisingly, though, the sight of all this destruction didn't make me cry. Instead, I felt something else stirring in my chest. Determination. Danny had tried to destroy every physical reminder of my life before him, as if by destroying these things he could erase who I was, reduce me to nothing but another victim of his schemes. "Right," I said, my voice steady. "Let's get to work. Sophie, can you handle the kitchen? Mom, maybe start in the bedroom. Lauren, help me with the living room. Anything that can be saved goes in boxes. Everything else." I swallowed hard. Everything else gets documented for the police and then thrown away. As we worked, more friends arrived to help. Fellow teachers from my school, parents of my students, even my principal stopped by with coffee and sandwiches for everyone. The support was overwhelming, each person bringing not just their hands to help, but their hearts too. "Miss Wilson?" A small voice came from the doorway. I turned to find Lily, one of my third-grade students, standing there with her mother. In her hands, she held something colorful. "I made you a new artwork since Daddy said your old ones got ruined." The crayon drawing showed a stick figure with a big smile, surrounded by hearts and stars. "It's you," Lily explained, "being brave." I had to turn away for a moment, blinking back tears. When I'd imagined my life falling apart, I'd pictured being alone in the wreckage. Instead, I was surrounded by people helping me pick up the pieces, offering everything from physical labor to crayon drawings of encouragement. By late afternoon, we'd salvaged what we could. It wasn't much. Some clothes that had escaped Danny's scissors, books that were only partially damaged, a few photos that had been stored in albums he hadn't found. Everything else was documented and discarded, each piece a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. "Where should we take the boxes?" the moving company supervisor asked. I looked at my mother, suddenly realizing I hadn't thought that far ahead. I don't know. "To our house," my mother said firmly. "The guest room is already made up, and there's plenty of storage space in the basement for everything else." "Mom, I can't." "Yes, you can," she interrupted. "Emma, honey, let us help you. Let us be there for you while you rebuild." Looking around at the empty apartment, at the bare walls where photos had once hung, at the vacant spaces where my life had been, I realized something important. Danny hadn't just stolen my trust and my savings. He'd stolen my independence, my confidence in my own judgment. And the only way to get those things back was to accept help, to let myself be supported while I found my feet again. "Okay," I said softly. "Thank you." As the movers carried out the last of the boxes, I stood alone in what had once been my bedroom. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes in the air. This room had been my sanctuary, the place where I dreamed of my future with Danny. Now it was just an empty space, waiting for its next occupant. I pulled the fortune cookie paper from my pocket. Every ending is just a new beginning in disguise. Standing there in the ruins of my old life, I finally understood what those words truly meant. This ending, painful as it was forcing me to begin again. To rebuild not just my physical surroundings, but my whole life, this time on my own terms. My phone buzzed, another news alert about the case. Apparently, more victims had come forward, bringing the total to 7 women across 3 states. 7 lives disrupted, 7 hearts broken, 7 dreams shattered. But also 7 women standing up, speaking out, refusing to let shame silence them. "Ready to go?" Sophie asked from the doorway. I took one last look around the empty room. "Yeah," I said, turning away from the past and toward whatever future awaited me. "I'm ready." The sun was setting as we left the building, painting the Seattle skyline in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, meetings with lawyers, conversations with the school board about handling the publicity, decisions about what to do next. But for now, surrounded by people who truly cared about me, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel so soon after my world had fallen apart. Possibility. Danny had tried to destroy me, first with his lies and then with his rage. But standing in the fading light of day, watching the moving truck pull away with the remnants of my old life, I realized he had failed. Because while he could destroy my possessions, he couldn't destroy my spirit. While he could break my heart, he couldn't break my will to rebuild. And while he could shatter my trust in him, he couldn't shatter my trust in myself. This was my new beginning, disguised as an ending. And somehow, I knew I would make it count. The first day back at Roosevelt Elementary felt like walking into a spotlight. Whispers followed me down the hallway as I made my way to my classroom, clutching my newly rebuilt teaching materials to my chest. The local news coverage of Danny and Olivia's arrest had made sure everyone knew my story. My 3rd grade classroom felt like the only safe harbor in a storm of pitying looks and hushed conversations. Principal Stevens was waiting by my door, his usually stern expression softened with concern. "Emma," he said quietly, "are you sure you're ready to be back? No one would blame you if you needed more time." The thing about time was that it didn't heal anything if you just sat around waiting. The past week at my parents' house had taught me that. Every morning spent staring at the ceiling, every afternoon organizing what remained of my possessions, every evening watching the news coverage of Danny and Olivia's expanding case, none of it had made me feel better. "I'm ready," I said, fishing my classroom key from my bag. "My students need me." "They've missed you," he admitted. "But there have been questions, parents calling, concerned about the publicity." "I'll handle it," I promised, pushing. Open my classroom door. The familiar sight of 24 little desks arranged in clusters, the reading corner with its well-worn beanbags, the science station with its collection of rocks and leaves. It all felt gloriously normal. Except it wasn't normal. My students' artwork had once covered the walls, but Danny had destroyed most of it in his rampage through my apartment. The personal photos that used to sit on my desk were gone too, casualties of his rage. The room felt bare, stripped of personality, much like I felt. "Miss Wilson!" The excited shriek came from the doorway as my students began filtering in for the day. Lily, the same student who had drawn me the brave stick figure, rushed forward with another piece of artwork. "I made you another one, and so did everyone else." Suddenly, my students were crowding around, each holding drawings and cards. "We wanted to make your classroom pretty again," explained Marcus, a usually quiet boy. "Since the bad man ruined everything." Tears pricked my eyes as I looked at their offerings, drawings of flowers and rainbows, cards with wobbly handwriting expressing everything from "we missed you" to "you're the best teacher even if you didn't get married." Their unconditional acceptance and desire to help heal what was broken touched something deep inside me. Principal Stevens quietly excused himself as I began hanging the new artwork, my students eagerly directing me on placement. By the time the morning bell rang, the walls were transformed, not with the carefully curated displays I'd lost, but with something more precious, genuine expressions of love and support from 24 innocent hearts. "Okay, class," I said, taking my place at the front of the room. "Who's ready to learn?" 24 hands shot into the air, and just like that, I was Miss Wilson again, not the jilted bride from the news. Here, in this space, I could focus on multiplication tables and reading comprehension instead of police statements and lawyer meetings. The morning passed in a blur of lessons and activities. If my voice sometimes shook, if I occasionally had to take a deep breath to steady myself, my students didn't seem to notice. They were just happy to have their teacher back, peppering me with questions about what I'd done during my vacation. Their parents had apparently explained my absence as an unexpected break. At lunch, Sophie texted me, "How's it going? Need an emergency rescue?" I smiled, typing back, "Actually doing okay. Kids make everything better." It was true. Children had an amazing way of cutting through adult complications to what really mattered. None of my students cared about trust funds or con artists or viral news stories. They just cared that I was there, teaching them, listening to them, being present in their lives. The afternoon brought a different challenge. Parent. Pickup time meant facing the adults who had read every salacious detail of my failed wedding in the papers. I steeled myself as mothers and fathers began arriving, preparing for awkward encounters. Mrs. Rodriguez, Marcus's mother, was the first to approach. I braced myself for questions or pity, but instead she handed me a covered dish. "Enchiladas," she explained. "My grandmother always said good food helps heal a broken heart." "And Emma?" She squeezed my hand. "You're teaching my son more than just academics now. You're teaching him about resilience." One by one, other parents stepped forward. Some offered food, others simply words of encouragement. Mr. Chen, Sophie's father, promised free coffee for life at his cafe. Mrs. Patel invited me to her yoga studio. Even Mrs. Thompson, known for her sharp tongue at PTA meetings, expressed her support. "We've got your back," she declared firmly. "Anyone gives you trouble, they'll have the whole parent committee to deal with." By the time the last student left, I felt overwhelmed by the unexpected wave of community support. My classroom phone rang, the front office letting me know I had a visitor. For a moment, panic fluttered in my chest. Danny was still in custody, but Olivia had made bail. But it was just Lauren, carrying a box of supplies for my classroom. "Thought you might need these," she said, setting down brand new markers, construction paper, and decorative borders. "Mom said to remind you about dinner tonight. She's making your favorite lasagna." I looked around my transformed classroom, the walls now covered with student artwork, new supplies ready for projects, evidence everywhere of people caring about my recovery. "I think I'm going to be okay," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Of course you are," Lauren replied. "You're a Wilson. We don't break. We just redesign." That night, over my mother's lasagna, my father shared updates from his lawyer friend. The case against Danny and Olivia was growing stronger. By the day, more victims had come forward, including a woman in Portland who had lost her entire inheritance to their scheme. Bank records showed a pattern of fraud going back years. "They're offering you a deal," he said carefully. "If you'll testify about your experience, about how they targeted you and gained your trust, it will help establish their pattern of behavior. But you don't have to do it, Emma. No one would blame you for wanting to put this all behind you." I thought about my students, about their simple wisdom and unconditional support, about Mrs. Rodriguez's enchiladas and Mrs. Thompson's fierce protectiveness, about Lauren's words, "We don't break, We redesign. I'll do it, I said. Not just for me, but for all the other women they hurt, and for all the women they might have targeted next. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. That's my girl. Later that evening, as I settled into what was becoming my new routine in my old bedroom, I opened my laptop. I hadn't looked at social media since the wedding disaster, too afraid of what I might find. But tonight felt different. Tonight I felt stronger. The first thing I saw was a Facebook group, Standing with Miss Wilson. It had been created by my students' parents and was filled with messages of support, offers of help, and fierce declarations of loyalty from my school community. There were photos too, my students' artwork, community events planned in my honor, even a fundraiser organized by the PTA to help replace my destroyed teaching materials. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but for the first time since my wedding day, they weren't tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of gratitude, of being touched by the goodness that can emerge from darkness. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Heard about your first day back. Proud of you. Ice cream and bad movies tonight? I typed back quickly. Rain check? Need to prep for tomorrow's lesson. These kids deserve my best. Her response was immediate. They're getting it. They're getting you, and that's better than your best. Setting my phone aside, I pulled out my lesson planner, one of the few things that had survived Danny's destruction because it had been in my desk at school. Tomorrow, we were starting a unit on butterflies, focusing on metamorphosis. How fitting, I thought, considering my own transformation. A sudden memory hit me. Danny mocking my choice of profession early in our relationship. Teaching? Really? You could do so much better with your background. At the time, I'd defended my passion for education, but his words had planted seeds of doubt. Now I understood. He'd been trying to separate me from what I loved, trying to make me question my choices so I'd be more open to his manipulation. But he had failed. Here I was, still teaching, still touching lives, still making a difference. He hadn't managed to take that from me, just like he hadn't managed to take my spirit, or my community, or my ability to trust in genuine goodness. The butterfly lesson plan spread before me. I began to write. Tomorrow, my students would learn about caterpillars and chrysalises, about the miracle of transformation. They would learn that sometimes breaking down is just the first step to becoming something more beautiful. I glanced at the brave stick figure Lily had drawn, now proudly displayed on my bedside table. The simple crayon drawing captured something profound, the ability to stand tall even when life tries to knock you down. My students saw me as brave, so that's what I would be. Not because I felt brave all the time, but because sometimes being brave means simply showing up day after day and refusing to let the darkness win. A text from Detective Clark popped up on my phone. Meeting tomorrow about your testimony. 4 p.m. work? Yes, I replied. I'll be there. Setting my phone down, I returned to my lesson plans. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the police meeting, more whispers in the hallways, more battles with my own healing heart. But it would also bring 24 smiling faces eager to learn, a classroom full of love expressed in crayon and construction paper, and another chance to prove that while Danny and Olivia might have stolen my trust fund, they couldn't steal my future. Because that future wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every student who needed to learn that setbacks don't define us. Every parent who trusted me with their child's education. Every woman who might find strength in my story. Every person who needed to believe that after betrayal, after heartbreak, after public humiliation, it was possible to stand up, dust off, and begin again. The butterfly diagram stared up at me from my lesson plan, reminding me of nature's most beautiful truth. Sometimes the most complete transformations begin with complete dissolution. Sometimes you have to let everything fall apart before you can see what you might become. I was no longer the naive bride in a custom lace gown, believing in perfect love stories. I was becoming something else, stronger, wiser, more authentically, myself. And unlike the fairy tales I'd once believed in, this transformation wasn't happening because of a prince or a wedding or a magical moment. It was happening because of 24 children who saw their teacher as brave. Because of a community that refused to let scandal overshadow support. Because of family and friends who held me up when I couldn't stand alone. And most importantly, because somewhere beneath the heartbreak and humiliation, I had found an unshakable truth. I was more than what had been done to me. I was Miss Wilson, third-grade teacher, butterfly expert, survivor. And tomorrow was another day to spread my wings. The courthouse loomed before me, its granite steps already crowded with reporters despite the early hour. Detective Clark had warned me they'd be here. Danny and Olivia's preliminary hearing had attracted media attention from across the state. Their elaborate scheme, spanning multiple victims and states, made for irresistible headlines. Sophie squeezed my hand as we approached the press gauntlet. Remember what the lawyer said. No comments, eyes forward, keep walking. I gripped my coffee cup tighter with my free hand, grateful for the warmth seeping through my fingers on this chilly Seattle morning. The cardboard sleeve bore a message written in Mr. Chen's familiar handwriting. "You've got this, Emma." Such a simple gesture, but it steadied my nerves. The reporters surged forward as we reached the steps. Microphones thrust toward my face as questions bombarded me from all sides. "Miss Wilson, how does it feel to face your ex-fiancé today? Were there warning signs you missed? Did you suspect Olivia Parker was more than just an ex-girlfriend? What would you say to other women who might be targets of similar schemes?" That last question made me pause mid-step. What would I say to other women? The thought of someone else going through this nightmare, believing in love only to discover it was all an elaborate con. But Sophie's gentle tug kept me moving forward. Through the massive wooden doors and into the relative quiet of the courthouse. "Miss Wilson." A tall woman in a crisp suit approached us. "I'm Andrea Martinez, the prosecutor handling your case. Thank you for coming early. We have some things to review before the hearing." She led us to a small conference room where Detective Clark was already waiting with a stack of files. The next hour was spent going over my testimony, every detail, of my relationship with Danny, every red flag I'd missed, every manipulation tactic he'd employed. "The defense will try to paint this as a simple case of cold feet," Andrea explained. "They'll suggest Danny truly loved you, that his marriage to Olivia was a drunken mistake, that this whole thing is being blown out of proportion." "But the other victims," I started. "Are all prepared to testify too," Detective Clark assured me. "But your case is special, Emma. You're the one who exposed them before they could complete their scheme. Your testimony could be crucial in establishing their pattern of behavior." A knock at the door interrupted us. Lauren poked her head in, slightly out of breath. "Sorry, I'm late. Traffic was insane, but I brought reinforcements." Behind her stood Mrs. Rodriguez and several other parents from my class, all wearing Standing with Miss Wilson buttons. My heart swelled at their presence. "The courtroom's filling up," Lauren reported. "Half the school seems to be here." Andrea checked her watch. "It's almost time. Emma, are you ready? Ready to face the man who had nearly destroyed my life? Ready to look into the eyes of the woman who had helped him do it? Ready to bare my soul and my shame in front of a courtroom full of strangers and supporters?" "Yes," I said, standing up and smoothing down my carefully chosen outfit, a simple blue dress that made me feel professional and strong. "I'm ready." The courtroom was indeed packed. As I made my way to the front, I saw familiar faces everywhere, fellow teachers, parents from school, even some of my students' older siblings. Principal Stevens sat near the back, offering an encouraging nod. And then I saw them. Danny and Olivia sitting at the defense table, both in conservative suits that screamed, respectable citizens. Danny's hair was shorter than I remembered, his face unshaven. He looked smaller somehow, less charming, less overwhelming. Olivia sat ramrod, straight, her expression carefully neutral. Neither of them looked at me as I took the stand. The oath was administered, and Andrea stepped forward to begin her questioning. Miss Wilson, please tell the court how you met Daniel Martinez. Taking a deep breath, I began my story. With each word, each revealed manipulation, each exposed lie. I felt something shifting inside me. This wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about reclaiming my narrative, taking back the story that had been twisted and used against me. I described the charity event where we'd met, now knowing it had been carefully orchestrated. I detailed how Danny had slowly worked to gain my trust, how he'd shown interest in my teaching career while subtly suggesting I could do better. I explained how he'd isolated me from friends who might have seen through his act, all while maintaining his double life with Olivia. And when did you first learn about the trust fund? Andrea asked. 3 months into our relationship, I replied. He made it seem like such a casual conversation. He was talking about his dreams for the future, asking about my family traditions. The trust fund came up naturally, or at least I thought it was natural at the time. What happened after that? The relationship intensified. Danny became more serious about marriage, about joining our lives together. He was especially interested in the clause requiring marriage before I could access the fund. As I spoke, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Danny was writing something on a legal pad, his attorney reading over his shoulder. Olivia's perfect posture had slipped slightly. The questioning continued, each answer revealing another layer of their scheme. How they'd used mutual friends to gather information about me. How they'd manufactured situations to make Danny appear more trustworthy. How they'd played on my insecurities and desires to manipulate me into exactly where they wanted me. Then came the hard part, describing my wedding day. The courtroom was silent as I recounted Olivia's dramatic entrance, the revealed marriage, certificate, the public humiliation. My voice shook slightly, but I kept going. After the ceremony was canceled, what did the defendant do? He came to my friend's apartment where I was staying. He tried to convince me Olivia was lying, that their marriage wasn't legal. When that didn't work, I paused, remembering his transformation from pleading lover to angry con man. He showed his true self, called me a stupid, naive little teacher, said everything in life was about money. And later that night, he broke into our apartment, my apartment, and destroyed everything he could find. My teaching materials, my photos, my clothes, anything that represented my life before him. Objection. Danny's lawyer stood up. There's no proof my client was responsible for that damage. The security cameras in the building caught him entering and leaving, Andrea countered, and several neighbors witnessed it. Overruled, the judge declared. Continue, Miss Wilson. I described finding my possessions in ruins, but then I added something that wasn't in my prepared testimony. But he failed. He destroyed my things, but he couldn't destroy me. He couldn't destroy the community that supported me, the students who believed in me, or my ability to trust in genuine goodness. Danny's head snapped up at that, his eyes meeting mine for the first time. I held his gaze steadily, letting him see what he hadn't been able to break. The defense's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint me as a jilted woman out for revenge. They suggested I'd known about Danny's marriage to Olivia, that this was all an elaborate scheme to avoid the wedding. They tried to make me appear unstable, unreliable. But with each attack, I grew stronger. The answers came clearly, confidently. When they tried to twist my words, I untwisted them. When they attempted to confuse me, I stayed focused. When they tried to shame me, I refused to be shamed. Finally, after what felt like hours, I was dismissed from the stand. As I walked back to my seat, I passed close to the defense table. Danny reached out suddenly, his fingers brushing my arm. "Emma," he whispered. "I'm sorry." The touch sent a shiver through me, but not of fear or longing. It was revulsion, pure and simple. This man who had once held such power over my heart now seemed pathetically small. I didn't respond, didn't even break stride. His words meant nothing. They were just another performance, another attempt at manipulation. I had given him enough of my time, my trust, my energy. He would get no more. The rest of the hearing passed in a blur of legal terminology and procedural matters. In the end, the judge ruled there was more than enough evidence to proceed to trial. Danny and Olivia were led away in handcuffs, their bail revoked due to new evidence of attempts to contact other potential victims. Outside the courthouse, the reporters were still waiting. This time, when they thrust their microphones forward, I was ready. "Miss Wilson, what would you say to other women who might be targets of similar schemes?" I thought about my students, about the lessons we'd been learning about butterflies and transformation, about how sometimes the most beautiful changes come from the most difficult challenges. I would tell them that their value isn't in their bank accounts or their trust funds. It's in their hearts, their minds, their ability to rise above betrayal. And I would tell them they're not alone. There's a whole community of people ready to help them rebuild, ready to remind them of their worth. The reporters clamored for more, but Sophie and Lauren were already guiding me away, toward where Mrs. Rodriguez waited with her car. As we drove away from the courthouse, I felt lighter somehow, as if testifying had lifted a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying. "You did good, Emma," Sophie said softly. "Really good." Mrs. Rodriguez adjusted her rearview mirror to look at me. "My Marcus asked me this morning if his brave teacher would still be brave after going to court. I wish he could have seen you up there." I smiled, thinking of my students and their simple, profound wisdom. "Tell him Miss Wilson learned something important today. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right even when you are scared." "Speaking of your students," Lauren chimed in, "don't forget you promised to help me with the science fair projects tomorrow. Those volcanoes won't build themselves." The normality of the reminder, something so ordinary after such an extraordinary morning, made me laugh. Life was going on. I was going on. And somehow, I was stronger for having faced my betrayers, for having told my truth, for having refused to let their actions define me. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, science, fair preparations, more legal meetings, the ongoing process of rebuilding my life. But for now, sitting in Mrs. Rodriguez's car with people who truly cared about me, I felt at peace with where I was and who I was becoming. Danny and Olivia had tried to make me a victim in their elaborate scheme. Instead, they had inadvertently made me a survivor, a fighter, and an example of resilience for my students and community. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. The real estate agent's heels clicked against hardwood floors as she led me through the small apartment. Morning light streamed through large windows, illuminating a space that felt worlds away from the home I'd shared with Danny. This 20th floor unit in Capitol Hill offered views of the Seattle skyline I'd once admired from Sophie's living room, but from a different angle, a new perspective. "The building has excellent security," the agent, Rachel, explained, probably noticing how I'd examined the locks and surveillance cameras in the lobby. "Keycard access, 24-hour doorman, security cameras on every floor. And you said, you work at Roosevelt Elementary? That's just a 15-minute walk from here." 3 months had passed since my testimony at the preliminary hearing. 3 months of living with my parents, of rebuilding my life piece by piece, of learning to trust my own judgment again. The trust fund that Danny and Olivia had targeted was now finally mine to access, Not because of marriage, but because I'd turned 29 last week. The bitter irony wasn't lost on me. The previous tenant was an artist, Rachel continued, gesturing to the built-in shelving along one wall. She used this space as a studio, but it would make a perfect reading nook or grading station. I could see it. A comfortable chair, good lighting, space for lesson planning and student work. A place that was entirely mine, untouched by memories of betrayal. "What about the lease terms?" I asked, running my hand along the smooth countertop in the kitchen. 12 months minimum, but given your situation. Rachel hesitated. "The building owner followed your story in the news. He's willing to offer a month-to-month arrangement if you'd prefer. No pressure to commit long-term." The kindness of strangers still caught me off guard sometimes. Since the story had gone public, I'd experienced it again and again. People going out of their way to help, to show support, to make things just a little easier. "No," I said firmly. "I'll take the 12-month lease. I'm done letting fear make my decisions." Rachel's face broke into a genuine smile. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let's get the paperwork started." Later that afternoon, I sat in my classroom during lunch break, scrolling through furniture websites on my laptop. The school day had been particularly good. My students had aced. Their spelling test, we'd had a breakthrough with fractions, and no one had asked about the upcoming trial. "Furniture shopping?" Sophie's voice came from the doorway. She held up a paper bag from her father's cafe. "Thought you might need brain fuel." I accepted the offered sandwich gratefully. "Just signed a lease on an apartment. Now I need to fill it." "Please tell me you're not getting another beige couch," she teased, pulling up a tiny student chair. "That thing you had with Danny was tragic. Actually, I was thinking red, or maybe deep purple." Sophie's eyebrows shot up. "Bold. Choice for Miss Wilson. Maybe it's time for bold choices." We ate in comfortable silence, watching students play outside during recess. My phone buzzed. Another email from Andrea Martinez, the prosecutor. The trial was scheduled to begin next month. 6 of Danny and Olivia's other victims had agreed to testify, each with their own story of manipulation and betrayal. "Have you read the latest?" Sophie asked, nodding toward my phone. "About the other victims?" "Not yet. Sometimes it's still too raw." "No, not that. About Olivia." I looked up sharply. "What about her?" Sophie pulled out her phone, quickly finding what she was looking for. "She's offering to testify against Danny in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently, she has evidence that he was planning to double-cross her too. The whole marriage thing in Vegas? It was his idea, but not for the reasons she thought." My hands trembled slightly as I read the article. According to Olivia's statement, Danny had married her as insurance, documentation he could use to threaten her if she ever tried to expose their schemes. The marriage certificate she'd revealed at my wedding. She'd planned to use it to force Danny to split my trust fund with her. Instead, he'd been planning to use it to frame her for everything if they got caught. "It's like a Russian nesting doll of betrayal," I murmured. Layer after layer of lies. "The best part?" Sophie scrolled down. "Apparently he did this to other partners too. There are at least 3 more secret marriages in different states. The guy's like a black widow spider, except instead of eating his mates, he just bankrupts them." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch. Sophie gathered our trash as students began filtering back into the building. "Want to go furniture shopping after school?" she offered. "Lauren's free too. We can make a girls' afternoon of it." I thought about my empty apartment waiting to be filled. "Actually, I think I need to do this on my own. But rain check?" Sophie squeezed my shoulder understandingly. "Proud of you, Em." That evening, I walked through several furniture stores, taking my time, really considering each piece. The old Emma would have rushed to fill every space, would have chosen safe, neutral pieces that wouldn't draw attention. But I wasn't that Emma anymore. In the end, I chose a deep purple velvet couch that made me smile every time I looked at it. A bright geometric rug that would have given Danny's minimalist sensibilities a heart attack. Bookshelves painted sunshine, yellow. Art pieces that spoke to me, not to some carefully curated image of sophistication. "Interesting choices," the sales associate commented as she processed my order. "Very vibrant." "Yes," I agreed. "They are." As I drove home, still to my parents' house until the furniture was delivered, my phone rang through the car's Bluetooth. Detective Clark's name appeared on the display. "Emma, do you have a minute?" I pulled into a parking lot, killing. The engine. Detective Clark never called without a reason. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she assured me quickly. "Actually, something's right for a change. We found Danny's storage unit in Portland, the one he kept under an alias, Emma. He kept trophies." My heart stuttered. Trophies? Items stolen from his victims, jewelry, photos, personal documents, and diaries, his own diaries, detailing every con, every manipulation, every plan, including emails and text messages between him and Olivia, planning your wedding day revelation. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. So it wasn't just about the money? They planned to humiliate me publicly from the beginning? Yes and no. The public revelation was Plan B. Originally, they were going to wait until after the wedding, after they had access to your trust fund. But Danny got greedy. He started seeing another potential victim in Portland, someone with an even larger inheritance. He was going to use the marriage to Olivia as leverage to keep you quiet while he moved on to his next target. The casual cruelty of it all made my stomach turn. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you deserve to know the truth. And because we found something else in that storage unit. Something that belongs to you." I held my breath, waiting. "Your grandmother's charm bracelet, the one Danny claimed was stolen during the apartment break-in? He had it the whole time. We can release it to you now that it's been documented as evidence." The charm bracelet, a family heirloom passed down through generations, each charm representing a significant moment in our family's history. I'd been devastated when it disappeared, believing it lost forever in Danny's destructive rampage. "When can I pick it up?" "Tomorrow morning?" "And Emma, there's something else. We found his list, the women he was targeting next. There were 3 more in Seattle alone. Your story going public, the media attention, you didn't just save yourself. You saved them too." After hanging up, I sat in my car for a long time, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Tomorrow, I would reclaim another piece of my history. Next week, I would move into my new apartment. Next month, the trial would begin. But tonight, sitting in my car with the weight of new revelations settling around me, I felt strangely peaceful. Danny and Olivia's elaborate schemes, their layers of betrayal, their calculated cruelty, it all seemed smaller somehow, less overwhelming than it had once been. They had tried to write my story for me, casting me as either a naive victim or a bitter ex-fiancé. Instead, I had chosen to write my own story, one filled with purple couches and yellow bookshelves, with supportive friends and resilient students, with truth and justice and healing. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. "Just heard about the storage unit. You okay?" I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, really looked at the woman I was becoming. "More than okay," I typed back. "I'm free." Starting my car, I began the drive home. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new revelations, new opportunities for growth. But tonight, I was grateful for how far I'd come, for the strength I'd found, for the life I was building on my own terms. Danny might have collected trophies from his cons, but he had failed to claim the most important prize, my spirit. That remained unbroken, unbowed, and entirely my own. And no storage unit, no matter how well hidden, would ever contain that. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new apartment, casting long shadows across the purple velvet couch and yellow bookshelves. Moving boxes still littered the hardwood floors, but this space already felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived before. Perhaps because every choice, from the geometric rug to the eclectic art pieces, had been entirely mine. A knock at the door interrupted my morning coffee ritual. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, probably in her mid-30s, clutching what appeared to be a newspaper. My heart sank. Another reporter looking for a story about Danny and Olivia's upcoming trial. But when I opened the door, she didn't thrust a microphone in my face or start asking questions. Instead, she stood there twisting the newspaper in her hands, looking uncertain. "I'm Rebecca," she said quietly. "Rebecca Chen. I was almost one of them. One of their victims." My coffee mug nearly slipped from my fingers. Rebecca Chen, one of the names from Danny's list, one of the women he'd been planning to target next. "Would you like to come in?" She stepped into my apartment, her eyes taking in the bright colors and bold patterns. "This isn't what I expected," she admitted. "From the news stories, I thought." "You thought I'd be living in a cave of despair?" I couldn't help but smile. "Sorry to disappoint." Rebecca laughed, some of her tension easing. "No, it's good. It's really good. I've been wanting to talk to you, to thank you, if your story hadn't gone public when it did." She trailed, off, collecting herself. "I met Danny at a charity gala last month. He was charming, attentive, said all the right things. When the news broke about your wedding, I realized he'd been using the same lines on me, the same tactics." I gestured for her to sit on the purple couch while I fetched another coffee mug. "How did you find me?" "Your school. I'm a parent." "There, or will be. My daughter starts kindergarten this fall. When I saw your name on the faculty list during orientation, it felt like maybe it wasn't just coincidence. Like maybe I was meant to thank you in person." As we talked, Rebecca shared her own story. Recently divorced, inheriting her family's successful import-export business, exactly the type of target Danny and Olivia looked for. She'd been flattered by Danny's attention, drawn in by his seemingly genuine interest in her life and her daughter. He mentioned knowing a great teacher at Roosevelt Elementary, she recalled, shaking her head. Said I should request his friend's class for my daughter. Now I realize he was probably laying groundwork, creating connections he could exploit later. The realization that Danny had been using my reputation, my profession, to groom his next victim made my skin crawl. But looking at Rebecca, alive and unharmed and warning bells unignored, I felt a surge of gratitude that at least some good had come from my public humiliation. "Have the police contacted you?" I asked, remembering Detective Clark's ongoing investigation. "Yes, I gave a statement about my interactions with Danny. They're using it to establish pattern of behavior for the trial." She hesitated. "Are you ready? For the trial?" The question hit harder than I expected. The trial was just 2 weeks away now, my testimony scheduled for the second day. 6 other victims would take the stand, sharing their stories of manipulation and betrayal. And now, thanks to Olivia's deal with the prosecution, we would hear the inside story of their operation. "I don't know if anyone's ever really ready for something like this," I admitted. "But I'm stronger than I was. We all are." Rebecca nodded, understanding in her eyes. "The other women, the ones he successfully conned, have you met them?" "Not yet. But we've been in contact through our victim advocate. We're meeting for dinner tonight, actually. Would you like to join us?" The invitation surprised us both, but it felt right. Rebecca might not have lost her savings or her trust to Danny's schemes, but she was part of this story too. A story of women supporting women, of warnings heeded and disasters averted. As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Support. Group meeting moved to 7. Dinner still on for 5? The support group had become an unexpected source of strength over the past months. Not just for dealing with Danny and Olivia's betrayal, but for learning to trust again, to recognize red flags, to value ourselves beyond our bank accounts or relationship status. "I'd like that," Rebecca said softly. "To meet the others, to understand what could have been." We exchanged contact information, and I promised to text her the restaurant details. As she turned to leave, she paused at the door. "Your apartment," she said, gesturing to the vibrant space around us. "It's beautiful. Not just the colors and furniture, but the energy. It feels healing." After she left, I stood in my kitchen, letting her words sink in. Healing. Yes, that's exactly what this space represented. Not just a new apartment, but a new chapter. A place where I could process the past while building a future on my own terms. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of unpacking and organizing. Each item I placed in my new home felt like a small act of reclamation. The books Danny had once mocked as simple children's literature now filled my yellow shelves with pride, teaching materials, picture books, novels that had shaped my love of education. Around noon, Lauren arrived with lunch and determination to help organize. "The trial starts in 2 weeks," she reminded me, spreading Chinese takeout containers across my new dining table. "You need to be settled before then, focused." She was right. The upcoming trial loomed like a storm on the horizon, necessary but daunting. Andrea Martinez, the prosecutor, had warned us it wouldn't be easy. Danny's defense team would try to discredit us, paint us as gold diggers or scorned women out for revenge. Olivia's testimony might help our case, but it would also mean reliving every manipulation, every lie, every calculated move they'd made. "I met one of the women from Danny's list today," I told Lauren between bites of lo mein. "Rebecca. She's joining us for dinner tonight." Lauren paused in her unpacking of kitchen. "Us, how was that? Meeting someone who almost became me," I finished. "Actually, it was empowering. Seeing her alive and whole and unharmed, it makes everything worth it. The public humiliation, the media circus, all of it. You saved her, Em. Her and who knows how many others." I thought about the list found in Danny's storage unit. 3 potential victims in Seattle alone, each carefully researched and targeted. How many more would there have been if Olivia hadn't chosen that moment to reveal their schemes? The afternoon brought more unpacking, more organizing, more creating of my new space. Sophie stopped by after her hospital shift, bearing housewarming gifts, a first aid kit, because you're the clumsiest teacher I know, and a set of wine glasses, because some wounds need liquid medicine. As we prepared to leave for dinner, I caught my reflection in the new mirror hanging in my entryway. The woman staring back at me looked different from the bride who'd stood in Lakeview Gardens just months ago. Stronger, yes, but also more authentic. More herself. The restaurant we'd chosen for dinner was a small Italian place in Capitol Hill, family-owned and discreet. As we approached, I saw them. The other women whose lives had been touched by Danny and Olivia's schemes. 6 women who had lost money, trust, and pieces of themselves to the same elaborate con. Maria, a software engineer from Portland who'd lost her inheritance. Jennifer, a widow from Vancouver whose late husband's life insurance had been Danny's target. Sarah, Lisa, Patricia, and Rachel, each with their own story of manipulation and betrayal. And now Rebecca, the one who got away. As introductions were made and wine was poured, I looked around the table at these remarkable women. Each had been chosen because of their financial assets, but sitting here, sharing stories and strength, it was clear that their true wealth had nothing to do with money. To Emma, Maria raised her glass, who had the courage to share her story and save others from the same fate. But I shook my head. To all of us, for surviving, for speaking up, for refusing to let shame silence us. The conversation flowed, easily, moving from shared experiences to future plans. Maria had started a tech company focused on financial security for women. Jennifer was working with domestic violence shelters, sharing her story of financial abuse. Each woman had found a way to transform her pain into purpose. The hardest part, Lisa admitted during dessert, wasn't losing the money. It was losing faith in my own judgment. How do you trust again after something like this? The question hung in the air, heavy with shared understanding. How do you trust again? How do you open your heart, your life, your future to someone after such a profound betrayal? Maybe, Rebecca offered. We start by trusting ourselves first. By recognizing the strength it took to survive, to rebuild, to be sitting here tonight. Her words resonated around the table, heads nodding in agreement. We had all been chosen because we appeared vulnerable in some way. Recently divorced, newly inherited wealth, looking for connection. But vulnerability wasn't weakness, and wealth wasn't just about money. As the evening wound down and goodbyes were exchanged, plans were made to meet again. Not just for mutual support during the trial, but for friendship, for understanding, for the unique bond that forms between women who have faced similar storms and emerged stronger. Walking home with Sophie and Lauren, I felt a profound sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring more unpacking, more preparing for the trial, more steps forward in my journey of healing. But tonight had reminded me that I wasn't walking this path alone. The lights of my new apartment building beckoned ahead, 20 stories of possibilities and fresh starts. In 2 weeks, I would face Danny and Olivia in court, would tell my story one more time. But it would be different now, because this time, I wouldn't be speaking just for myself, but for all of us. The women who survived, the women who got away, and the women who might have been next. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. Thank you for tonight. For everything. Looking up at my new home, at the life I was building from the ashes of betrayal, I smiled. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead us exactly where we need to be, to the people we need to meet, to the strength we need to find. The purple couch and yellow bookshelves waited above, bold choices for a bold new chapter. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, surrounded by the love of friends and the solidarity of survivors, I was exactly where I needed to be. Seattle's autumn rain peppered the windows of Andrea Martinez's office as we reviewed my testimony one final time. 5 days remained until the trial, and every detail needed to be perfect. The prosecutor's desk was covered with documents, financial records, text messages, photos tracking Danny and Olivia's elaborate scheme across 3 states. Remember, Andrea said, pushing a strand of dark hair behind her ear, they'll try to trigger an emotional response. Danny's attorney will paint you as unstable, vindictive. Olivia's deal with us means she'll corroborate your story, but the defense will still try to discredit you. Through the window, I watched leaves swirl. In the wind, their colors muted by the gray sky. What if they bring up the trust fund? Try to make it seem like I led Danny on with promises of money. Andrea's expression hardened. Let them try. We have evidence that he researched you months before your first meeting. Records of him and Olivia discussing potential targets. Your trust fund wasn't something you dangled. It was why they chose you. A knock at the door interrupted us. Detective Clark entered carrying a thick folder. The forensics team finished analyzing Danny's laptop from the Portland storage unit. Emma, you need to see this. She spread photos across the desk, screenshots of spreadsheets, each row a potential victim. Names, ages, occupations, financial assets, all meticulously cataloged. My name was highlighted in yellow, with notes about my teaching career, my family connections, even my favorite coffee order. He had similar files on all his targets, Detective Clark explained. But yours was the most detailed. They spent almost a year planning before they approached you. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. A year of planning, of calculating exactly how to manipulate me, of designing the perfect trap. Even knowing what I knew now about their schemes, the level of premeditation was staggering. There's more, Detective Clark continued, pulling out another document. We found a script. Literally, a script. Lines he used. Situations he engineered. That chance meeting at the charity event? They paid the host to introduce you. The coffee shop where you had your first date? Olivia worked with the barista to ensure Danny would accidentally bump into you there. I thought back to that day, how charming Danny had seemed when he spilled his coffee near my table, how sincere his apology had been. All an act, carefully choreographed for maximum effect. Use this, Andrea advised, gathering the documents. Channel any anger or hurt into strength. The jury needs to see not just what they did, but how deliberately they did it. Leaving the office, I found Sophie waiting in the lobby. One look at my face told her everything. That bad? They planned everything, Soph. Every moment, every coincidence. Even that time he surprised me at school with flowers. It was calculated to make my colleagues see him as the perfect boyfriend. Sophie linked her arm through mine as we walked to her car. But he wasn't perfect enough to fool everyone. Remember how your dad always said something felt off? She was right. My father, with his principal's instinct for insincerity, had never quite warmed to Danny. At the time, I'd attributed it to normal parental protectiveness. Now I wondered what he'd seen that I'd missed. Speaking of your dad, Sophie continued, he called while you were in with Andrea. Apparently, the school board wants to talk to you tomorrow. My stomach clenched. With the trial approaching, I'd been waiting for this. Public schools were sensitive about publicity, especially negative attention. Would they ask me to take a leave of absence? Transfer to another school? The next morning, I sat in the board room, facing 5 administrators who held my career in their hands. Principal Stevens sat beside me, his presence a silent show of support. Miss Wilson, the board president began, we've been following the developments in your case closely. The trial next week will undoubtedly bring renewed media attention to our district. I straightened in my chair, prepared to defend my position, my ability to teach despite the publicity. But what came next surprised me. We'd like to establish a financial literacy program for our students, teaching them about manipulation, about recognizing and avoiding scams. Your experience, painful as it was, could help prevent others from falling victim to similar schemes. Would you be interested in developing such a curriculum? Tears pricked my eyes as the implications sank in. They weren't pushing me away. They were asking me to use my experience to help others. Of course, I managed. Yes, absolutely. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind of teaching and planning. My students, as always, provided the best distraction from my pretrial anxiety. We were studying weather patterns, and their excitement over creating cloud formations in jars was contagious. After school, I met with the other victims, no, survivors, for our final group preparation session. Maria had flown in from Portland, Jennifer from Vancouver. We gathered in my apartment, the purple couch and yellow bookshelves creating a warm, safe space for sharing our fears about the upcoming trial. I heard Olivia's testimony is scheduled for the 3rd day, Lisa said, cradling a mug of tea. Right after Emma and Maria. Sarah, the youngest of our group at 26, shuddered. I don't know if I can face her. Danny's bad enough, but Olivia. She was supposed to be one of us, a woman. How could she do this to other women? The question hung heavy in the air. Olivia's betrayal felt different somehow, more personal. She'd known exactly how vulnerable we were, had helped Danny exploit that vulnerability. Because she was vulnerable too. Rebecca offered quietly. As the one who'd escaped their scheme, she often provided unique insights. From what the prosecutor said, Danny manipulated her just like he manipulated us. The only difference is, he convinced her to become a predator instead of a prey. A knock at the door revealed Lauren, carrying bags of takeout. As we ate, the conversation shifted from the trial to the future. Maria shared updates about her tech company, designed to help women protect their financial independence. Jennifer had been asked to speak at a conference about financial abuse in relationships. "What about you, Emma?" Patricia asked. "After the trial, what's next?" I thought about the school board's proposal, about the students who would soon learn valuable lessons from our painful experiences. I'm staying exactly where I am, teaching, sharing, growing. They tried to make me ashamed of being just a teacher. Now I know that's exactly what I'm meant to be. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop to review my testimony one last time. A news alert popped up, another article about the case. The headline caught my eye: "Wedding Day Revenge or Calculated Exposure." New evidence suggests Olivia Parker's dramatic revelation was part of larger scheme. The article detailed how Olivia's wedding day revelation hadn't been a spontaneous act of revenge, but rather a carefully planned contingency. If Danny had tried to cut her out of the con, she would expose everything, ensuring maximum public humiliation. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Clark. "Just saw the article. You okay?" "Actually, yes," I replied. It helps knowing it wasn't personal, that even the way they hurt me was calculated. Walking to my window, I gazed out at the Seattle skyline. 5 days until the trial. 5 days until I faced Danny and Olivia in court. 5 days until I shared my story one final time. Not just for myself, but for every woman they'd hurt and every woman they might have targeted next. My grandmother's charm bracelet clinked softly on my wrist, recovered from Danny's storage unit, restored to its rightful place. Each charm told a story of family strength, of women overcoming challenges. Now it carried a new story, one of survival and transformation. Another text came through, this time from Sophie. "Pre-trial sleepover tomorrow? Lauren's bringing face masks. I'm bringing wine. Mom's sending lasagna." I smiled, imagining the evening ahead. Girls' night, but with a purpose. Strengthening bonds, sharing strength, preparing for whatever the trial might bring. "Count me in," I typed back. "And Sophie? Thank you for everything." Her response was immediate. "Always. We've got you." And they did. They all did. My family, my friends, my students and their parents, my fellow survivors. A network of support I never knew I needed until Danny and Olivia's betrayal forced me to rebuild my life. The rain had stopped, leaving the city gleaming under streetlights. In 5 days, I would tell my story again. But this time, I wouldn't be the heartbroken bride from the viral photos or the naive victim from the news reports. I would be a woman who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. A teacher turning painful lessons into valuable knowledge. A survivor helping others find their way through similar storms. The purple couch caught the city lights, its rich color, a reminder of how far I'd come from the safe beige choices of my life with Danny. 5 days until the trial, yes, but also 5 days until I could finally close this chapter and fully embrace the next one. My phone buzzed one more time. A message from Rebecca. "Just wanted to say thank you again. Your story saved me from becoming another name in their files. But more than that, watching you rebuild, seeing your strength. It's inspiring. You're teaching more than just your students now." Looking around my vibrant apartment, at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, I felt ready to face Danny and Olivia, ready to share my story, ready to help others avoid similar pain. The trial would be difficult, but I wasn't the same woman they'd targeted. I was stronger now, wiser, surrounded by genuine love and support. 5 days. And then, finally, freedom to write the next chapter of my story. This time, on my own terms. The morning of the trial dawned cold and clear, Seattle's typical autumn rain giving way to unexpected sunshine. Standing before my bathroom mirror, I smoothed down my navy blue dress, chosen carefully with Andrea's guidance to project strength and professionalism. Today would set the tone for everything that followed. My phone had been buzzing since dawn. Messages of support from fellow teachers, my students' parents, the other survivors. Each one a reminder that I wasn't facing this alone. The last text came from Mrs. Rodriguez. "My entire prayer group is with you today, Emma. Show them what a teacher's strength looks like." Sophie arrived exactly on time, carrying coffee and bagels neither of us would probably eat. Her scrubs were replaced by a formal pantsuit. She'd taken the day off to be there. Lauren was already waiting in the car, along with our mother. "Ready?" Sophie asked, though we both knew there was no real way to be ready for this. The courthouse steps were already crowded despite the early hour. Journalists lined the entrance, cameras ready. Among them, I spotted familiar faces. Reporters who'd covered the wedding disaster, who'd tracked the investigation, who'd helped bring other victims forward. Andrea met us at the security checkpoint, her trademark confidence unwavering. "Good turnout," she noted, nodding toward the packed courtroom. "The jury needs to see this level of community support." The courtroom was indeed full. My fellow survivors occupied the front row: Maria, Jennifer, Sarah, Lisa, Patricia, Rachel. Behind them sat my colleagues from Roosevelt Elementary, led by Principal Stevens. Even Rebecca had come, though she wouldn't be testifying. Then Danny and Olivia were brought in, separately. Danny in a conservative suit that couldn't quite hide his prison pallor. Olivia in muted colors that seemed designed to make her fade into the background. Neither looked at me, but I studied them openly. These people who had planned my destruction, who had calculated every moment of pain, they seemed smaller somehow, less overwhelming. The proceedings began with opening statements. The prosecution went first, Andrea's voice clear and compelling, as she laid out the pattern of deception, the calculated nature of their schemes, the lives they'd deliberately destroyed. "This is not a case about love gone wrong," she declared. "This is not about marriage or trust funds or even broken hearts. This is about predators who systematically targeted women, who turned emotional manipulation into a business model, who treated human beings as nothing more than entries in a spreadsheet." Danny's lawyer countered with the expected defense, that every relationship involved some level of calculation, that Danny had genuine feelings for his victims but made poor choices, that Olivia was the true mastermind who manipulated both Danny and the women they targeted. Olivia's attorney, bound by her plea deal, focused on minimizing her role while emphasizing her cooperation with the prosecution. The contrast between their strategies was stark, Danny throwing Olivia under the bus, while she prepared to do the same to him. Then it was time for the first witness. Maria took the stand, her tech executive poise unshakable as she detailed how Danny had systematically emptied her accounts, using her inherited wealth to fund their operation and set up new cons. During cross-examination, Danny's lawyer tried to paint her as a willing participant who only cried fraud when the relationship ended. But Maria held firm, producing emails and recordings that showed the calculated nature of their approach. Through it all, I watched Danny's face. Each piece of evidence seemed to chip away at his carefully maintained facade of innocence. By lunch break, his confident smile had been replaced by something harder, colder. In the courthouse cafeteria, surrounded by my support system, I picked at a salad while reviewing my own testimony with Andrea one final time. Tomorrow morning, I would take the stand. My story would be different from Maria's. I was the one who got away, whose public humiliation had inadvertently exposed their entire operation. Miss Wilson? A timid voice interrupted our preparation. I looked up to find Katie, one of my third-grade students, standing there with her mother. Mom said we could come watch to show support. Tears pricked my eyes as I hugged her. More parents and students had come, filling the back rows of the courtroom, showing their children what it meant to stand up to injustice. The afternoon session began with financial evidence. Detective Clark presented a meticulous trail of transactions showing how Danny and Olivia had moved money between accounts, using one victim's losses to fund the next con. Your Honor, Detective Clark explained, pointing to a complex diagram, this shows a clear pattern. Each new victim's assets were used to create the appearance of wealth and success, attracting the next target. It was essentially a romantic Ponzi scheme. As the evidence mounted, I watched the jury's reactions. Several members took careful notes, particularly when the prosecution showed Danny's spreadsheets, the ones that had cataloged potential victims like inventory. A middle-aged juror visibly recoiled when they displayed the script Danny had used, complete with annotations about which lines worked best on different personality types. My own entry was highlighted. Emphasize dedication to teaching. She's insecure about her career choice compared to her wealthy family. Use this. The day ended with forensic accounting testimony, dry but crucial evidence of the scheme's scope. As the judge called for adjournment, Andrea squeezed my hand. You're up first thing tomorrow. Get some rest. But rest seemed impossible. Back in my apartment, surrounded by the bold colors I'd chosen to represent my new life, I practiced my testimony one last time. The purple couch had become command central, covered with preparation notes and supporting documents. Sophie and Lauren insisted on staying over, turning my pre-testimony anxiety into something resembling a slumber party. We ordered pizza, painted our nails, tried to pretend tomorrow was just another day. I got a message from Jennifer, Sophie mentioned, scrolling through her phone. The Vancouver papers are covering the trial too. Apparently, similar scams have been reported up there. Women are coming forward, sharing their stories. Lauren nodded, adding another coat of polish to my toenails. That's what they never counted on, right? Women supporting women, sharing information, warning each other. A text from Andrea interrupted our conversation. Change of plans. Defense is calling Olivia first tomorrow. They're scrambling, which means we're winning. Be ready. The news sent a fresh wave of tension through me. Olivia's testimony was supposed to come later, after mine and Maria's stories had set the stage. Moving her up meant the defense was desperate, hoping her insider perspective might somehow salvage their case. It's good news, Sophie assured, me seeing my expression. They're running scared. Danny's lawyer knows he's losing control of the narrative. Later that night, after my sister and best friend had fallen asleep on air mattresses, I stood at my window watching the city lights. Tomorrow, Olivia would tell her version of events. The woman who had burst into my wedding in a stolen spotlight would now have a different kind of stage. My phone buzzed softly, a message from Rebecca. Just heard about the schedule change. Remember, whatever Olivia says tomorrow, she's the one who has to live with her choices. You already won by breaking free. The words resonated, reminding me of how far I'd come from that devastating day at Lakeview Gardens. Back then, I'd felt utterly destroyed, humiliated, lost. Now, standing in an apartment that reflected my true self, surrounded by genuine love and support, preparing to testify not from a place of victimhood but of strength, I realized Rebecca was right. I'd already won. Not just by exposing their scheme, but by refusing to let it break me, by rebuilding my life on my own terms, by turning my pain into protection for others. Tomorrow, Olivia would tell her story. Danny would watch his carefully, constructed lies unravel, and I would stand in my truth, supported by a community they'd never counted on, stronger than they'd ever imagined I could be. My grandmother's charm bracelet caught the city lights. each charm a reminder of the strong women in my family history. Tomorrow, I would add my own chapter to that legacy. Not as a victim of a calculated con, but as a survivor who refused to be silenced. The trial would continue, testimony would be given, justice would unfold. But the real victory had already happened in the month since that wedding day. In purple couches and yellow bookshelves, in classroom moments and community support, in friendship and family, and the unshakable knowledge that I was exactly where I needed to be. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, watching Seattle sparkle under a clear autumn sky, I was ready. Ready to face Olivia's testimony, ready to tell my story, ready to show my students and fellow survivors and the world what real strength looked like. The girl Danny and Olivia had targeted, the one they'd marked as insecure and manipulatable, no longer existed. In her place stood a woman they'd never thought I could become. Tomorrow they'd meet her properly, and nothing they could say would shake her truth. The morning Olivia took the stand changed everything. She walked to the witness box in a plain gray dress, her once perfect hair pulled back simply, her designer heels replaced by modest flats. Gone was the woman who had burst into my wedding in a stolen spotlight. This Olivia seemed smaller, more human, almost fragile. My fellow survivors sat tensely in the front row as Olivia was sworn in. The air in the courtroom felt thick with anticipation. Danny's attorney shifted uncomfortably. His client's former partner in crime was about to become his biggest problem. Andrea rose, her heels clicking against the courtroom floor. Ms. Parker, please tell the court how you first met Daniel Martinez. Olivia's voice trembled slightly as she began her story. 6 years ago, she had been the target, not the accomplice. Fresh from a broken engagement, struggling with family, debt? She had been perfect prey for Danny's particular brand of manipulation. He was charming, attentive, she explained, her eyes fixed on her hands. He made me feel special, understood. When he discovered my financial troubles, he seemed so genuinely concerned. He had a solution for everything. The solution, it turned out, was joining him, learning his techniques, becoming the very thing that had almost destroyed her. First as a reluctant participant, then as an eager partner in an ever-expanding web of deception. We developed a system, Olivia continued, now directing her testimony at the jury. I would play different roles, the jealous ex, the concerned friend, whatever the situation required. Danny would identify targets, women with assets, but also emotional vulnerabilities. The trust fund was important, yes, but more important was finding someone who could be manipulated. She described their methodology in clinical detail, how they researched potential victims, crafted perfect chance meetings, designed every interaction for maximum emotional impact. The spreadsheets, the scripts, the calculated progression from first meeting to financial exploitation. Then she reached my case. Emma was different, Olivia said, finally looking at me. She had the financial assets we typically targeted, but she also had something else. A strong support system, a fulfilling career, genuine confidence beneath her insecurities. Danny saw these as challenges. He became obsessed with proving he could break someone so whole. Danny's facade cracked slightly at these words. I watched him clench his fists under the defense table, his carefully maintained expression of innocence slipping. The wedding day revelation wasn't spontaneous, Olivia admitted. We had multiple contingency plans. If Emma proved harder to manipulate after marriage, I would appear with evidence of our relationship. If she began asking too many questions about finances, I would emerge as the concerned friend with warnings about Danny's past. Every scenario was planned, every reaction anticipated. Andrea guided her through the evidence, emails, text messages, recorded conversations detailing their schemes. With each revelation, Danny seemed to shrink further into himself, his dreams of maintaining plausible deniability evaporating. "Why come forward now?" Andrea asked finally. Olivia's composure cracked slightly. "Because Emma did something we never expected." When confronted with the truth, instead of hiding in shame like our other victims, she stood up. She spoke out. She made it impossible for us to simply move on to the next target. And watching her rebuild her life, seeing her strength, it made me realize what I'd become. The cross-examination was brutal. Danny's attorney tried to paint Olivia as the mastermind, suggesting she had manipulated Danny just as much as their victims. But the evidence was too strong, the pattern too clear. During the lunch break, I found myself in the courthouse bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. The door opened, and Olivia walked in. We stood there reflected in the mirror, the con artist and the target, the woman who had tried to destroy me and the woman I had become in spite of it. "I am sorry," Olivia said quietly. "Not just for what we did to you, but for what I let Danny turn me into. Watching you these past months, your strength, your dignity, the way you've helped others, it made me realize I had a choice too." I dried my hands slowly, considering my response. "We all have choices, Olivia. You chose to become what hurt you. I chose to help others avoid that hurt. The difference isn't in what was done to us, but in what we decided to do about it." She nodded, tears spilling onto her cheeks. As I turned to leave, she spoke again. "Thank you for being strong enough to stop us. Some of the women on Danny's list, they were so young, so vulnerable. You saved them without even knowing they existed." The afternoon session brought more revelations. Financial records showed how Danny had been planning to betray Olivia too, moving assets she thought were safely hidden. The marriage in Vegas hadn't been just about controlling me. It had been his insurance policy against her. Text messages revealed their discussions about my wedding day, how they had planned every detail of my humiliation. But they also showed something else. Danny's growing obsession with breaking me completely, with proving he could destroy not just my trust, but my entire sense of self. He became fixated, Olivia testified. The more Emma succeeded in her career, the more her students adored her, the more determined he became to prove she was nothing without him. The apartment destruction wasn't just rage, it was his final attempt to erase her identity. As the day's testimony concluded, Andrea was visibly pleased. Danny's defense was in shambles, his claims of innocence impossible to maintain against the weight of evidence and Olivia's insider testimony. Walking out of the courthouse, I was surprised to find my entire third-grade class waiting on the steps, holding handmade signs of support. Mrs. Rodriguez stood with them, along with several other parents. "We thought you could use some sunshine," she explained, as my students surrounded me with hugs and pictures. That evening, my apartment filled with supporters, fellow survivors, friends, family. Sophie ordered pizza, Lauren brought wine, and gradually the tension of the day dissolved into something warmer. "I just heard from Andrea," Maria announced, checking her phone. "Danny's attorney has approached her about a plea deal. He knows he's finished." The news rippled through the room. A plea deal would mean no more testimony, no more cross-examination, no more having to relive every painful detail. "What are you thinking?" Sophie asked softly. I looked around my vibrant apartment, at the life I'd built from the ashes of betrayal, at the women who had become sisters in survival, the friends who had become family, the community that had helped me rebuild. I think it's time to close this chapter," I said finally. "We've shown our strength. We've exposed their schemes. Maybe now we can focus on helping others avoid the same pain." Rebecca raised her glass. "To Emma Wilson, teacher, survivor, protector of others." "To all of us," I corrected, "to choosing light over darkness, strength over victimhood, truth over silence." Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I stood at my window watching the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Andrea. Danny took the deal. Maximum sentence, full restitution to all victims. It's over. But it wasn't really over. It was just beginning. Tomorrow, I would stand in front of my class and teach them about weather patterns and multiplication tables, but I would also teach them about strength and resilience. The financial literacy program I'd developed would help others protect themselves from predators like Danny and Olivia. My grandmother's charm bracelet caught the light, each charm telling its own story of survival and strength. Now I had my own story to add, not just of survival, but of transformation. The purple couch and yellow bookshelves no longer felt like acts of defiance against Danny's controlled aesthetic. They were simply me, choices made in freedom and confidence. The life I'd built wasn't defined by what I'd survived, but by what I'd chosen to become. One final text came through from Detective Clark. Just got word about Danny's plea deal. You did it, Emma. You broke the cycle. Every woman he might have targeted in the future owes you their happiness without even knowing it. Standing in Dao, my apartment, surrounded by the colors and choices of my new life, I felt at peace. Danny and Olivia had tried to write my story, casting me as a victim in their elaborate scheme. Instead, I had become the author of my own life, writing a story of strength, resilience, and hope. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new chances to help others find their strength. But tonight, I was exactly where I needed to be. Whole, strong, and finally, completely free. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.